My name's Neil Mackillop. I work in clinical development in the therapy area of cardiovascular diseases at AstraZeneca, and I'm a senior medical director there, running phase 2, 3, and occasionally phase 4 trials. I came to DIA primarily to attend a session on sustainability, particularly sustainability in clinical trials. So I was at a session where we were discussing new data from a number of different organizations, mostly pharma companies, on the carbon emissions from clinical trials. Primarily phase 3, but also some phase 1 trials. It was interesting to hear the views of different stakeholders as to, what should happen next and what sustainability means. And interesting, I've been working with some other pharma companies and we've been looking at these emissions, but other people have, view sustainability from quite a different lens as to what it actually is. So it was interesting to hear those views and I guess take some of it away and think about what we should do differently as we, back in the business. There are always financial challenges. A challenge which I'm interested in addressing is the increasing interest in society in climate change as a result of carbon emissions. And so we've started looking at the emissions from our clinical trials and seeing that it's significant. There are, we have significant emissions from clinical trials. And so, that's an area that we've been looking at, getting the data on what our emissions are actually from our trials and starting to think about how we reduce them. The reason why it's an important topic is that about 4% of all carbon emissions come from the healthcare sector. So it's a really big source of emissions. And it's a little bit paradoxical that we're supposedly producing drugs for patients or treatments for patients, but at the same time, we're producing emissions which are resulting in disease. So it just makes sense that the healthcare sector would try and reduce its emissions. And within that 4% of all global emissions that are from healthcare, about one of those 5% comes from pharmaceuticals. So it's important that we reduce those emissions. Most big pharma companies and many healthcare sector employers have goals around climate change and reducing the impact of carbon emissions. And certainly all the big pharma companies do. And we're starting to actually have achievements. So for example, the company I work for reduced our Scope 1 and 2 is the technical name for the emissions, but essentially it's the emissions that come from our sites and that we directly control. They were reduced last year by 60%. So that's a huge reduction in just 1 year in those carbon emissions. There are also a lot of carbon emissions coming from our suppliers. That's the vast, for most drug companies, most of their, maybe over 90% of their emissions are actually in their supply chain. So that's going to be a really hard task over the next decade at least to reduce those emissions. And so it's important we get started now because it's unlikely we're going to keep global warming beneath 1.5 degrees centigrade. It's probably going to be more than that, and the climate impacts are going to be increasingly severe. It's a neutral forum for a whole range of stakeholders that I don't meet day to day, and it's easy to forget those stakeholders exist if you sit in your own company or you sit working within a disease area with other industry and academic experts in that disease area. There are a huge range of stakeholders that we don't engage with day to day. We've got views that have impacts on what we do. So I think one of the aspects of DIA that's relatively unique is it's kind of neutral. It doesn't have any particular vested interest in supporting or driving a particular agenda on topics like sustainability, which means that it's a very good place to meet a lot of stakeholders and people with views that don't necessarily disagree with my views, but they come from a different place or they lead to different conclusions than the views that I've got. And so I think it's a good place to bring together people to discuss how we address issues that we all face and all have in common, but maybe are addressing in slightly different ways or looking at in different ways. And so it builds quite a wide perspective on issues that you wouldn't have otherwise. I'm looking forward to seeing where we are in March 2024. And I think DIA in Brussels will be a good place to hear from a whole range of speakers on what's an increasingly important topic.